Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Joanna. Thank you to be back with us for this second part of example that Oxfam implemented in the field relating to WASH system approach in fragile context. So to continue the interview, we had a couple of questions to you, Joanna, that are maybe more general and that you can use any experiences of Oxfam transfer to them. But, yeah. All right, yeah. So the first one will be, what is your experience in addressing systemic long-term issues when acute WASH needs should be addressed at the same time?
So we've talked about DRC, but in another context, working in Myanmar, Oxfam worked with the municipalities to address issues around sanitation. And what we had seen, or what we were working in, was an IDP settlement alongside a host community. And due to the humanitarian nature of addressing the needs and the immediate needs of the IDPs, a lot of sanitation had been done with some sort of waste treatment for the IDPs. Excuse me, but this was done on a more short-term project-by-project basis, and had really only concentrated on the IDP settlement. And so there was increasing tensions between IDP settlement and the host community. And so Oxfam, alongside UNICEF, worked with the municipality to look at waste treatment through sort of both septic tank sort of emptying and looking at the long-term nature of how economically it could be done, what policies and standard operating procedures need to be put in place, and found that over time that this could be done in a systemic way, with the municipality taking control of it and taking leadership of it. Because what we'd seen before was that there was some waste disposal, but it was done at an ad hoc basis. It was often quite expensive, and it was just dumped in places which obviously increased health risks. And so working to both train train truck drivers and waste disposal people to look at hygienic ways of doing it. There was the standard operating procedures, which were the first time in that region, and working to ensure that there was an economic market for it, and that people were paying for sort of the septic tank emptying at a reasonable cost, and knowing that it was going to be disposed of safely. And so this really shifted the dynamics both at the local level and helped to diffuse some of those tensions, but also worked within the system for a sort of system strengthening approach that addressed both immediate needs and long-term issues around sanitation.
Thank you, Joanna, for this explanation and a very good example of Myanmar. Now we would like to see a bit on different building blocks, some examples. So the first one will be on institutional arrangement, leadership, and coordination. Could you share an example where a WASH program addressed such gaps related to these specific building blocks?
So I think the Myanmar one is a good example of looking at working through the municipality directly, and really a lot of the programme was spent around influencing the sector. So not only the municipality and government, it was learning from different areas. So for instance, bigger cities, learning from them to see what was possible, and working to explain what the market process could be. And really that influencing piece took a long time and included, for instance, a visit by key people from the municipality to Thailand to look at what was possible. And so that coordination piece between the UN, between NGOs, between the government, and making sure that what was an idea or what was sort of collective sense of a problem actually became led, or the solution became led by the municipality. And it wasn't done despite them, which I think can often happen. And whilst can be quicker, actually doesn't, can lead to almost parallel services being set up, and that sustainability, once NGOs leave, is sort of under threat.
Thank you, Joanna. The second building blocks we would like to speak about is about finance, which is a quite important one often. And do you have any lesson learned now that you want to share with the students on how we can strengthen finance in fragile contexts?
Sure, and I think I'm going to go back a little bit to DRC and also introduce another context, which was working in the ASELs, the arid and semi-arid lands of northern Kenya. And in both of those cases, Oxfam worked with water strength, sort of water systems, to ensure the finance of them and ensure that there was revenue collected and it was spent properly and there was an accountability. So we've discussed DRC a bit, but that was really important. And I think one thing to mention from that is that in that piece, again, around influencing and behaviour change, time and effort needs to be put into working with populations to explain why it's important. Because of humanitarian, also there'll be certain philosophies that play out, and one of those in DRC was that water was free because it's from God, and that is true. Water is free. The problem is the systems to make it safe and potable and maintained are not, and I think there's a big difference. In Kenya, we worked with the water utility companies, and they'd already been set up under national legislation, and in places like Nairobi, they work really well. Whereas in Turkana, there were problems. There were sort of big problems with both their reach, accountability, and there was a lot of issues around where money was going. And so Oxfam did a lot to work both with improving the water sources, and we used solar in Turkana, and has become a blueprint for other organisations actually to be able to do that and to have an environmental friendly process versus just having generators. But on the revenue collection, Oxfam worked with the water utility company to introduce e-billing. There was a lot of work with a partner called Water Integrity Network to look at integrity management and work with the water utility company to improve their reputation. And over time, what we saw was that people from the water utility company were treated with more respect because people felt that they were more accountable to them, that systems were being maintained better. And actually the morale of staff in the water utility company went up, and you saw revenue collection go up alongside that in improvement in accountability. And so the two are really quite closely linked. But you also were able to work with them around budgeting and what budgets were needed and for how long.
Thank you, Jana, for this example. The next one, which is quite important, I think, and often a key gap in humanitarian response, it's about the resilient service delivery models and infrastructure. So do you have any example where Oxfam look at the design, construction, and maintenance of the services in the fragile context to strengthen the system, but also why is it different from our usual business? What is different?
Yeah, and I think probably going back to, I mean, across probably all three to a degree, but looking at northern Kenya is interesting, where the design and construction has been really important to be able to expand and contract with the context of increasing drought and sort of cyclical climatic shocks. And so that cellularization of water systems, which allows for better maintenance, obviously it's more environmentally friendly, but we have found that it's more reliable during the day, and that with a hybrid model where there is a generator, that at times where things are really drastic, that we were finding people were using it sort of 20 plus hours a day, which would be impossible with either the solar or the generator. And so both allowed for that piece, and having that understanding around within the design around the context has been really important. And that moves away from just from doing sort of simpler pumps and particularly groundwater systems that don't understand the aquifer and the recharge possibilities in places like ourselves. In DRC, again, a lot of the issues were around how do you construct a system that is long-lasting so that your management system is set up for success and not for failure. And I think both across DRC and Kenya, we've been doing, continue to work in Kenya. What's been interesting is how much rehabilitation or how much work it has to be put into the construction, the beginning to get it up to standard, to be able to have a proper maintenance process without it sort of being just a whole reactive system, and having that design, but also understanding the costs of maintenance over time. And so how are we putting aside money? What does that look like? And having that maintenance plan right from the get-go, which I think we don't often do. We have a system, we have a way of working, and then we either hand it over to a local partner or the government, and actually without it being either maintenance, a market assessment of how to get spare parts, and also any buffer money that is needed. And I think we need to move away from that into what is the maintenance piece has to be included in the initial costs.
Thank you a lot, Joanna. The last question is about trust and accountability, and you spoke already a bit on the first interview, but we think it's really important. Maybe it's not somewhere we put lots of resources often. So do you have example where Oxfam has been looking at trust?
So I think across the board, what we've seen is that that piece of trust, both, and it doesn't just include Oxfam, right? And so if we're talking about system strengthening, how that relates back to government and local power holders, as well as the NGOs. And so I think Myanmar is a good example where working with the municipality to be able to work in a relationship across population, municipalities, UN and NGOs was important, because it helped everybody have an ongoing dialogue and improved relationships between everybody. And again, in Kenya, that interesting example from the water utility company where there wasn't a lot of trust. And actually once issues of accountability were addressed, and once you saw service improve, but also people understanding where their money goes and what it's used for, actually the trust went up. And what was interesting is that you saw revenue go up, and you saw the morale of staff in the water utility company go up. And so it actually has quite a lot of knock-on effects, a trust piece that goes beyond the initial, I guess, warm, fuzzy feeling, and into actually it has an impact on how much money people are going to pay, how they respond to the management, and how management responds to the people. And I think I gave an example last time where we hadn't understood that trust was ebbing away, and there was sort of really quite serious consequences for us not keeping up to date with the context, and that is really important because contexts change. And in DRC, we did a lot around formative research to understand people's motivations for paying for water, understand why, what are the hurdles to that, what are the issues, and that enabled us to speak into a conversation rather than just using sort of IEC materials or sort of public health messages. That allowed us to have a conversation that respected people's views and concerns instead of just sort of popularizing health messaging. And so that trust piece, I think, is important, and it's really a conversation versus just a one-sided dialogue.
Thank you, Jana, to answer this last question. Do you have keywords that you want to share with the students?
I think for all of our lessons learned, it always takes longer than you think. You know, and we, you know, it's very tempting to write a program and have assessments done in a couple of months and have construction done. And we have found time and time again that we are behind, because if we actually do proper assessments, if we actually take the time to understand markets, to understand motivations, to understand all of those pieces, that it genuinely takes a lot longer than we anticipate. So I think that is a big lesson learned for us. And one that we are working on at the moment, actually, to try and think through in the ASELs of Uganda is how do we do systems that do expand and contract with population movements, as we are going to see more climatic shocks, and systems need, you know, in contexts like the Horn of Africa and West Africa, we shouldn't be in a position where we are shocked at a water crisis every couple of years. This is the new norm, and we all of us need to get better at how we work within that. And I think, and that includes donors and NGOs and UN, but you know, there needs to be a lot of serious thought. So I guess that's something that we're thinking about and trying to look quite seriously at.
Thank you, Jana, for this last word. Thanks for the students to have listened, and we hope that you enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.